line 9. Now this is where things start to get a little bit ugly. Okay, I want to execute line 9. Line 9 has quite a few things to do. The very last thing I want to do on line 9 is to return a value. Can I return a value now? No, because I have to resolve two invocations of S5. The left-hand side of the multiplication is an invocation of S5. The right-hand side of the multiplication is another invocation of S5. Some people ask, but can we just consolidate the two invocations? Because one, they're both invoking S5, and two, apparently we are passing exactly the same parameters anyway. Shouldn't they return exactly the same result, and so we can simplify? The answer is no. Okay, as we will see in this example, the left-hand side and the right-hand side will return quite different values. Okay, and because most people read from left to right, we will handle the one on the left-hand side first. In other words, what we are trying to do right now is to handle this particular invocation. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. And since we're invoking a subroutine, we have to specify a return info or return line number. And since S5 returns a value, we have to specify a return info. We need one column for parameter n, and we need one column for parameter x. Let's deal with the easy ones first. X is the easiest, because I am using my parameter x to specify the new parameter x. My parameter x at this point is column f, which is already an alias of a column. I'm passing that by reference to x in the next invocation. If you already have an alias to a column and you're passing by reference, you're just passing the alias along. Remember, we do not make an alias out of an alias. So that means column I is just going to be an alias of column C. Is that okay? Because when you pass an alias by reference, you're just passing the alias. You do not make an alias out of another alias. N is not too bad, because when you look at n minus 1 on the left-hand side of the right arrow, this n refers to the n that I have. I'm actually still in the context of D, E, and F, and this n, which is column E, has a value of 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. Okay. Any questions about these two? The ugly one is column G, and I can already tell you that I need to turn on wrap text automatically, because it's going to be quite long. Okay. We know that we have to go back to line 9. We know the return is not done yet. We know that we are trying to handle the invocation to the left-hand side of the multiplication. We know the multiplication is not done yet, and we also know the invocation on the right-hand side is not done yet. So that's why this is going to be a little bit tedious to type, because we have so many operations on line 9 that has not been done yet. Are we okay with this step here? Are we okay with row 9 of the trace? Yes? Okay. Now this is also something that I realized from grading the homework assignments and also from questions that I get in the class. Most of the time people don't have any problems setting up additional columns as we invoke subroutines. The problem has to do with what do we do when we are done and we execute the return statement and we encounter the end of a subroutine. That's where the confusion happens. So moving forward, once we set up columns G, H, and I, we go into the subroutine and then we start execution from line 4 again. Line 4, once again, is checking n versus 0, and the answer is no, it does not equal to 0. And this would be a good time to do something like this so that we can easily keep track of the current context as opposed to the previous one. If the condition of line 4 is false, we go to line 8. Okay, so line 8 is going to add 2 to x. X, which is column I now, is an alias of column C. Column C had a value of 3. 3 plus 2 is 5, and we store it back into x, which is an alias of column C, and column C is updated to a value of 5. Is that okay? Okay. Then we move on to column 9, line 9 of the algorithm. We encounter exactly the same thing. And I can just copy and paste whatever I had before with only one exception, because n is now 0 instead of 1. The other 3 columns are still exactly the same as before. Are we doing okay?
No.
No? Okay. So let's focus on row 12 and row 13 of the trace. We are now at line 9, and this is the first time we get to line 9 in this invocation.
My problem is I don't understand how n got the value of 0.
N gets a value of 0 because we are executing line 9 using the context of columns G, H, and I. If you look at columns G, H, and I, the N, which is column H, has a value of 1. We are invoking the left invocation first,
Okay.
and it specifies N minus 1 to go to N, because
Okay.
N is 1, and 1 minus 1
Okay.
is 0, and as a result, column K has a value of 0. Okay. Are there any questions about this one? No more questions? Okay. So we'll go ahead and start from the beginning of the subroutine again, which is line 4. Line 4 asks, does n equal to 0? Yep, it does, because we can see the column K, which is n, has a value of 0 now. So if that is true, we move on to line 5. Line 5 wants to add 1 to x. X is an alias of column C. Column C has a value of 5 at this point. 5 plus 1 is 6. We store the 6 back into x, which is an alias of column C. As a result, column C is now updated to 6. Is that okay? Now we move on to line 6. What does line 6 do? Line 6 is just returning the value of x. Okay? So do we have to do another invocation? No. We just have to find out what is the value of x,
6.
which is not too hard. Exactly. Because x is an alias of column C, and column C has a value of 6 at this point. So we are effectively returning a value of 6. Now, tell me, what do we do when we execute a return statement? 3 things we have to do. 1, we find the rightmost return info cell. At this point, the rightmost one is column J. 2, we copy and paste it into this row. Okay, we'll go ahead and do it. So we go copy and we paste. And the last thing you do when you execute a return statement is to change the question mark to whatever value that we are returning. Tell me again, what are we returning? Okay, and we put a 6 here. And I'm done. I don't care what else is in that cell. It can be a return statement, it can be a print statement, it can be a conditional statement. I don't care. My only job as a return statement is to replace the question mark with the value that I'm returning. And I'm all done. Okay? Do not execute a statement inside the return info cell. This is not the right time to do it. Do not simplify. Okay? Do not replace n with some other value. Do not carry out calculations. Just replace the question mark. After line 6, we have nothing to do inside the conditional statement anymore, so we go all the way to line 11, which is the end of the subroutine. At the end of a subroutine, we do the deallocation of the 3 columns. We indicate that these columns are now deallocated. It is very important to remember which columns are in use and which ones are deallocated. Now these are all deallocated. So the next question is, I'm at the end of a subroutine. Where am I supposed to go next?
Line 9.
The return info cell tells me where to go, right? In other words, column J, or I should say J16 as a cell, is my verb. It tells me what else I have to do. I am supposed to go back to line 9 first. Okay, fine. I can go back to line 9. And on line 9, it now looks like this. In other words, the invocation of the left-hand side of the multiplication is done. Can I do the return now? No, because I still have the other side, right? I have the invocation on the right-hand side that I have not resolved yet. So the next thing I have to do on line 9 is to carry out the invocation on the right-hand side. What do you do when you invoke S5? The same three things we have to allocate again. So it just so happens that what do you allocate? Do I use column M? Do I use column J? Or do I use column G?
J.
We use column J because we always use the leftmost available column at the time to allocate. And since we have just deallocated columns J, K, and L, J is now available. So we'll reuse the same three columns. And it just so happens that they are also filling the same rows as before. But that is not always guaranteed. If the two invocations are different, one is invoking S5, the other one, let's say, invoking S6, and they have different parameters, then the columns can be reused for different purposes. So you have to keep that in mind. It's just that in our examples, we always seem to use the same columns for the same purposes. So once again, we have return info, we have n, and then we have x again. X, once again, is the easy one because we do not pass an alias of an alias. So we just pass the alias along. What should we do here with n? Well, first of all, what is my current context? Which columns are my current context? I'm setting up JK and L. So which three columns, is my current context?
GH and I.
GH and I. So that means, this n minus 1 on the left-hand side specifies the n, which is column H. Okay?
You return a 0.
And that will give me a 0 for column K, because 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay? Very good. We are now taking care of the right-hand side of the multiplication, which means when I go back to line 9 again, there's only two things to do. When I go back to line 9, the return has to happen. The 6 is already resolved just like the current state, but the right-hand side will also be resolved by the time we return, and therefore it is a single question mark now. So let's stop here and make sure everybody is okay with the return info over here. Yep.
So the n reverse, the n in the second, the right invoke still refers to the same n in the first invoke?
Not necessarily, but in this case it is. Okay? It's simply because we have not changed column H since the first invocation. But potentially it can change. If I pass n by reference to a subroutine, by the time I return from that subroutine, n could have been changed by the subroutine. So that it is not guaranteed that n will have the same value as 0. You cannot make that assumption. Okay? Any other questions about this row, row 19 of the trace? No questions? Okay. So once we set up columns J, K, and L, we will go into the subroutine, and that will make J, K, and L my current context. The first line of the subroutine is checking n equals to 0. It is true because n, which is column K, is 0. We go to line 5. It adds 1 to x. X is an alias of column C. So we'll go ahead and find out the current value of column C, which is already 6.
So
It's already 6,
7.
so that will turn it into 7 at this point.